and I have my new friend, Vera Bradova here, who is a fascinating survivor of a near-death experience with a lymphoma, treated with a novel, unconventional holistic therapy called Kali's Toxins. And she's going to tell the story of how it happened. And what I'm doing in my personal education is I'm trying to get a full education as a naturopath, starting with Mercola's audios and progressing from there. But this is the first I've heard of Kali's Toxins. So, Vera, thank you very much for coming on. Tell us a little bit about your history. She says has had a Jack London-esque career, which I love that reference. So tell us about your background and then your story.
I was raised in Czechoslovakia, ended up staying in America because the Soviets invaded in 1968. And I've basically had an adventurous life exploring various careers and traveling all over.
You were in a commune for a while, right? Does that mean you're a communist?
I'm an anti-communist, as you can imagine, growing up under communism.
Hippie communist. She is like my Eastern European friends, my other Eastern European friends. She is an intensely skeptical individual. And this is a great strength of yours. And I've only known you for about an hour now, but that's my feeling about you. Is that correct?
Well, I'm basically an optimistic skeptic. I think that the world is far more mysterious than we think, and there are always surprises out there. But at the same time, there's so much bullshit.
Yeah, it's one non sequitur after another, and it's purposeful. So they're trying to get us all so confused that they can round us up and do whatever they want, as far as I can tell. Yeah.
Right,
Vera's been kind enough to follow my Substack since about 6 to 8 months ago. And so we're pretty much on the same page with a lot of things. But what year was it that you had your diagnosis of your lymphoma?
I was diagnosed when I was 45 years old in 1995.
And this thing gradually developed as intra-abdominal masses, right? And then you had a couple of courses of ordinary therapy.
Well, to give a few more details, the oncologist that played a role in my diagnosis tried to push me into chemo right away. And I asked him for some information about the drugs that were going to be used. His nurse rummaged in the dusty closet and didn't come up with anything. So I got just a tad skeptical at that point. And when I got over the shock of the diagnosis, I began to do a lot of research and discovered that watchful waiting that was one of my lucky breaks. Watchful waiting is widely accepted as the first thing that you do after diagnosis because there is no advantage of treating right away. There is a disadvantage because then when you really need it, you don't have it.
Do you remember the kind of lymphoma that you had? Did they tell you?
It was low-grade, non-Hodgkin's, B-cell, low-grade follicular lymphoma, stage 4, because it was on both sides of my diaphragm, and I had bone marrow involvement.
Jeez, sounds terrible. So you watched it for a while. How many years did that go on?
It was about 6 years before the lymphoma started to cause me severe problems. I experienced a natural remission sometime a couple of years into this, which is not uncommon. And this period of time when I was on watchful waiting, I did a lot of research, and that's one of the ways I saved my life, because when I had to deal with oncologists and hospitals, I knew a lot, and towards the end of it, I also knew when to say no to more chemo, which would have killed me.
So how many courses of chemo did you have, and what are the names of it, and how long did they last, and how bad was it?
I had the first course of CHOP-R in the spring of 2002, and I chose, at that time, one of the drugs became available in liposomal form. And I thought, well, it's a newfangled thing. Maybe it'll give me an edge. It was a big mistake. I had real problems with it. My hands froze, which they warn you about, but I thought, well, maybe I'll luck out. Nope. And then I only had 2 courses of it, 3 courses of Rituxan, which is the monoclonal antibody they give you together. And then I collapsed and was hauled off to the hospital and was very ill with incredible pains. And they treated me like a drug addict. I had to interrupt the chemo and had several different issues. 3 months later, they diagnosed me with acute pancreatitis, finally. And so during all this time, I'm very unwell and unable to normally function. And so the chemo was the last thing I worried about. They took out my gallbladder, and I was in rehab for a while and I had lost tremendous amount of weight. And anyway, so I eventually got well from the pancreatitis and the other issues that I had developed Guillain-Barré syndrome. I mean, I was dragging my foot behind. It was one thing after another. It was a terrible summer. So once I got well, a year later, I had a full treatment of CHOP-R, which is 6 times. I believe they're 3 weeks apart. At that time, the cancer was quite active because the previous treatment was interrupted. So anyway, so here I am with quite active cancer, and they put me through these 6 CHOP-Rs. I don't get full remission.
They're a month apart?
Huh?
They're a month apart?
I think CHOP-Rs are, they're 3 weeks, then you do it for a week or so. Prednisone, Rituxan.
Cisplatin. I speculated that one of the drugs was cisplatin.
No, I didn't have platinum until the very last treatment, way back down the road. CHOP-R is the first thing they put you through in lymphoma, and it's cyclophosphamine, can't remember what the O is for.
So you had 2 or 3 years of this misadventure with medical misadventures with standard therapy.
Well, yeah, it just kind of went on because I was not the usual patient who would be in remission for a number of years. It came, I did the full treatment of CHOP-Rs, got partial remission, and then I think it was a year or 2 later, I managed to get myself into Bexar, which is monoclonal antibody with radioactive iodine attached. And it's only 2 treatments. Then they put you in a special room with lead walls or whatever. There were not many doctors doing it. I found a doctor in New Jersey who did, and I got full remission out of that.
How long did that last?
It lasted only a little over a year and a half, I would say. The treatment was somewhat complicated by the fact that by that time I had lung involvement and they had to drain my lungs, which was quite an adventure. They stick a needle in your back and then this coffee fluid just runs out, like a whole bottle of like milky coffee.
You've got the
And
right attitude. I've done that as a doctor for people with another problem, but I've never heard anyone describe it as an adventure.
Well, they told me that the Bexar wouldn't work until they drained my lungs, and I think they were right. So I sat there and let them drain me, and it didn't hurt at all, which was amazing. And so I thought, well, this is so interesting. And so after that, a couple of weeks later, they did the Bexar. And then 6 months later, they tested me, and I had whatever CAT scan, and there was no evidence of lymphoma. Another marker is LDH. If you have normal LDH, that's good also. So I think this was the fall of '05. No. Wow, I'm starting to lose track of the dates. Anyway, I moved to Utah shortly afterwards, and oh yeah, it was '05. So I moved to Utah, and I had a good remission lasting a year and a half, and then I felt the cancer coming back, and it was very fast. From the time I realized that something was happening, and then I had to transfer records from all different places that I've had records at out on the East Coast, and by the time they got me in the hospital, they discovered that I had kidney issues. They put a stent in me. They put a stent in my chest for the chemo. And by that time, I was very ill. I had ascites, to an extent like a pregnant woman would look. So again, they had to drain my belly before the treatment to get the ascites out, and which made me more comfortable. And then I began the treatment, which was called RICE, and that's when I got the cisplatin. Along with
So you all told you had 3 years or 4 years of conventional therapy that gave you several remissions but made you sick as hell.
well, the chemo was nasty, and you lose your hair every time and all that, and you feel like crap and you look worse, you're pale and sick. But it wasn't as challenging as Coley's. I have to tell you that. I'll tell you that story soon.
So tell us the story of the last doctor interview with the traditional doctors.
Okay, so I was in Grand Junction, Colorado, getting treated, and I was in the hospital for the treatment because it lasted several days, and that was the RICE treatment with cisplatin and Rituxan and a couple of other things. Etoposide, something. Anyway, you can look up the acronym. So after the 3 treatments, my caregiver and I went to Grand Junction to find out what happened, because we were hoping that I could get into the bone marrow program in Denver. And the doctor looked at my results and said that the situation looked very bad, that the chemo only beat the cancer a little bit, and I wouldn't be eligible for the bone marrow program, and he said that I should go home and straighten out my affairs and to talk to the hospice in Moab. And we were just sitting there in shock. And I looked at him and I said, "Well, what about a clinical trial?" And he said, "Too late." I still dream
we have
about
to laugh.
going. I should go at Halloween and haunt this guy up in Denver. I really should. I've dreamt about it for years.
You can write bad reviews of him online. Use your own name and tell the story.
So we went home in total shock. And he tried to sell me on more chemo. That's the other part. It was insane. So he says, he basically says that I'm dying, and then he tries to sell me on palliative chemo. But at that
they
point,
get 20% of the they get 20% of the revenues from all sales of chemo drugs. It's unique among doctors. If it were between two physicians, it would be called capping and it would be a felony. But between a pharma company and the doctor, they're allowed to give them a percent. So they're incentivized to sell as much of that stuff as they can. True story. And these guys are now cracking 400, 500, 600,000, and it's all from the retailing chemo drugs. So anyway, sorry to interrupt your story.
So here I am sitting in his office, and he knows that my bone marrow is hanging by a thread. I had my platelets were 7,
Yeah.
And I barely had, any of the other blood
components,
blood markers. So and my kidneys are on the fritz, right, from the beginning of the treatment. And so I look at him and I say, "Well, what are the side effects of these two drugs that you're recommending?" And he says, "Well, they'll probably damage your kidneys and damage your bone marrow." And I'm going
not good.
You.
And you had a belly full of pregnancies, including one that was probably 12 weeks or larger. In other words, the lymphomas had masses inside your abdomen. They were sticking out of your muscle wall.
Yes, at that point, I had a 14 centimeter tumor in my vena cava area, and I had smaller tumors all over my belly, and including palpable tumors in my groin.
So you did some research.
Oh, I did tons of research. I ran the first B-cell lymphoma website on the internet way in the old days.
You did. And so tell us the story of how you discovered the Collies toxins.
So when I'm still doing watchful waiting and doing all this research, I was living in Philadelphia, and I had the good luck of going to Fox Chase Cancer Center, and they let me copy everything for free. It was incredible. So I was spending my nights reading these medical research articles and trying to piece the picture together. And I wrote about it on my website for other people, because I felt that what patients were being taught was so grim and so hopeless. And I tried to put all that information together in a hopeful sort of framework, because there are some good parts, some lymphomas are easier than others, and there are things you can do. They tell you there's nothing you can do to make yourself healthier, which is another terrible thing. They tell you that right at the beginning, and that's not true. So anyway, So I was learning, and I learned when I was doing this research that palliative chemo has never been researched. They don't have studies because, I mean, the people are dying, so why should you care, right? You put your resources somewhere else. So when that doctor suggested palliative chemo, I knew that he had nothing to back it up with. And that made it somewhat easier to say no. And even so, it was extremely difficult. I was in a terrible position. I was scared. And when they tell you, well, we could do this other thing, there is a psychological push, and I had to resist it, and I had to say, I know better, and I'm not gonna do that.
Very few people do your kind of research or have your kind of intellect to pursue this stuff. So you'd heard about this. We're all the way up into 2008 or something like this, and you had heard about the Collies toxins at least 10 years before, and you went
Well,
back and you looked at it.
when I was running the website, I decided that I was going to research all these crazy, weird alternative treatments, and I even bought some of them and tried them. And there's SCIAC, which is this particular tea, and the Cancel, and all these things. And so, and there was another treatment that a lot of lymphoma patients were interested, that Dr. Brzezinski was doing way back. I don't know if he's still around, but it was a treatment derived from urine, and you wore the thing on you, the pump on you, and had to do that for a number of months. I had a friend who was doing it, and I found out that it wasn't working. So, I was gathering all this data about what might be helpful and what might not be helpful. And that's when I discovered Coley's. I discovered two treatments that worked. I discovered heat therapy, hyperthermia, which is not applicable to lymphoma, but they do use it in, say, if you had cancer in your arm, then you can overheat the arm and kill the cancer with the heat. Like localized melanoma, for example. So, and then for lymphoma, the only hopeful thing I discovered was Coley's toxins. And so I researched the heck out of it. I called, Dr. Coley's daughter was still alive, and then I called her office in New York and spoke with her secretary, and I spoke with the man who also carried the torch. Coley's toxins is only known because there were these torch bearers from the beginning. Dr. Coley first, then his daughter, and then a man named Wayne somebody. I forget his name now, but he heard Dr. Coley present his cures at a lecture in Indiana, and he told himself that when he retires, he was going to make the toxins and make them available to people. And I spoke with him. And
so it's COLE''S for the listeners. It's COLE''S for the listeners.
COLE was the name of the doctor. Yes, Coley Stocks.
Sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I talked to Wayne, and at that time he was helping a doctor in Guatemala to make the toxins out of his garage or something, and they were delivering the toxins to the hospital in Tijuana that I eventually went to. The toxins were, in my opinion, not very effective. They looked different. They were yellow, and Dr. Coley's toxins were purple. So I don't know quite, but
what were they? What was it exactly?
The toxins are two bacteria, 1 gram negative and 1 gram positive. One is erysipelas, and one is, I think, some form of strep. I forget.
And they
And
were
he,
killed. They were killed, and they were
well,
combined in the
he
solution.
bought, the story says that he went directly to Germany to Dr. Koch's laboratory and got some really virulent strains, and he cultured them on a slab of beef at home.
But the medication as given, they don't contain active bacteria. They're killed. So the body stimulates a reaction against these toxic bacteria, but they're not live. They don't infect you, right?
Well, the bacteria, as they grow in the meat, produce a fluid, and they microfilter the fluid, and that's what you inject. That's how
Got
I
it.
understand.
Yep. And that stimulates a fever reaction and various other things that we don't know about, right?
It makes you quite ill. That's the drawback to Coley's toxins, because it's not like comfortably sitting in a drip room at a doctor's office. You're basically, uh, aspirating uh, the toxin into a needle, like a diabetic needle, and then you have to inject yourself. And you have to be careful. You aspirate to make sure there's no blood coming in. Then you push it in. And in the beginning, I did it straight into my tumors.
Oh
I
my
had
gosh.
tumors that I felt in my groin, in my right groin, and that's where I began the treatment.
How many injections did you give yourself over what time period?
I've never counted them. I treated
Hundreds?
myself
Hundreds?
for well, I started treating every other day. Then I went to every third day, every fourth day. I had this schedule that I worked out because it made me so ill. I couldn't do it very frequently. In the hospital in Tijuana, they would skip a day. So I was there for 2 weeks when they were teaching me to do this, and they would do it Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and then take the weekend off.
So you
So,
had nausea and vomiting, or what? You just felt really bad.
well, the reaction is as follows: you shoot it into your body, uh, and the area where you inject it becomes very, very sore and swollen. So that's one bad aspect of it. That goes away in several days. Um, Kind of leaves a welt. But the main thing is that it's kind of like being hit with a horrible flu for about a day.
Wow.
And so I would shoot it at night, and then my caregiver would read me a story that tried to put it out of my mind, and I tried to fall asleep as soon as I could, so the worst aspects of it would be worked out during the night. And then the next day was pretty much lying down because I was ill and sore, and then the next day I was getting better.
This whole story and your attitude makes me think that perhaps you're here because of the power of positive thinking, like Norman Cousins or laughter or something like that. But I know it can't be true. So, how long did the process
Well,
take, and why did you decide to stop?
let me remark to that when I studied what Dr. Coley did, which is it's an incredible story, and somebody should make a movie about him. I had so much faith in him, in what he did, that I just kept repeating to myself, this will work, this will work, and I have to do it for 3 months to see if it works. And I kept it faithfully despite all the
Side effects. Yeah.
side effects that were just so unpleasant. You basically, yeah, your whole body hurts like during a flu. The shot hurts. Your head hurts. I mean, you feel like crap. Oh, and the other thing, doctor, is that it gives you the shakes because you get the fever, so you get the chills, and there you are shaking. I had to get a special blanket to keep myself warm.
How long did the whole process take? And at what point did you decide that was enough and you're just going to see how you do?
Well, I did this for a year.
Oh my
And
God.
then, so I have no idea how many times,
I get it.
basically.
Every other day for a year.
And
150
then
days of shooting yourself.
after, and I was doing CAT scans every 3 months, because I had gone through a clinical. I forgot to tell you that I did find a clinical trial before I went to Mexico, which made me better. Um, Okay, it was a monoclonal antibody. I knew it wasn't going to hurt my bone marrow or anything, and so I went through 8 weeks of a Danish clinical trial for a novel monoclonal antibody. The results is that the cancer shrank just a tiny bit, and then I went to I felt better. I felt, because by that time I was getting it's horrible skin problems, which is one of the issues in late lymphoma. You start itching all over, and you wake up and there's blood all over your bedding, and that kind of thing. So the clinical trial made me better, and I had the strength to go to Mexico. So that's the piece that was missing. So because of the clinical trial, I had to go and get tested every 3 months for 2 years. So I am extremely well documented. I'm documented from here to Timbuktu.
With the scans, and they showed that the tumor started to shrink when you started the Collies toxin.
Well, I went to Mexico in March. I had another CAT scan in April, which showed that the lymphoma had already started growing again. And then that's when I started doing the treatment really intensively at home. And by June, I knew it was working.
Wow.
A month
And
after that, at the end of July, I had to go for another CAT scan. You should see it. Massive shrinkage everywhere. Massive shrinkage.
you're you're recalled to life. That's the quote from A Tale of Two Cities, Dickens. Yeah.
I still had the stent up my kidneys,
Right.
because of the issues that the cancer was pressing on the ureter. And so when I finally came to the doctor and I said I wanted that stent out, he didn't want to do it. He says, this never happens.
So you did this for a year, your scans cleared gradually, and you decided yourself that it's time to quit for a while.
Well, okay, so it kept shrinking as I was getting the results for the CAT scan and for the LDH, which is a marker. And a year later, I became so debilitated from the program that I had put myself through, the Collies, that I just couldn't do it. I kept Collies in my fridge, and I would look at it and I would start feeling nauseous.
Wow.
I just couldn't do it anymore.
Did you have scan evidence of lymphoma at the time you quit?
I still had some.
Yeah. And you quit, and you haven't had any treatment of any kind since, right?
Okay, well, the story doesn't quite end there. I told you it was complicated.
Go ahead.
So I quit, and eventually, because I wasn't doing it anymore, I mean, the legend says that you need to bring it to full remission with Collies and then treat for 6 months, 5 or 6 months, to solidify the cure. I didn't believe in the cure at that time. But I was keeping my mind open. So anyway, so I quit, and then eventually it showed up on the CAT scans that the cancer was starting to grow again. It was small compared to what I had before. It wasn't bothering me in any way, but I was concerned that if I let it go for a while, it might cause problems. And my doctor in Denver recommended that that a new old treatment had come online that I could try. It was called bendamustine. It was an old East German drug that had just been approved in America for treatment. And so the fall of that year, I did 4 treatments with bendamustine. They were supposed to do 6, but I couldn't finish it. The doctor was very careful watching all my blood signs, and he saw some danger signs, and he says, that's it. We cannot do any more than 4.
Well, we don't want to minimize the expertise of these cancer doctors because they face the entire spectrum of internal medicine, every freaking thing you can imagine. And the good ones know their medicine better than practically anybody, and they're very caring. They deal with difficult situations that are, but some of them just sort of seem to have turned into, financial machines, and they don't really care about the patients. But you sound like you found some really good guys.
My doctors were a mixed bunch. They were mostly technicians, but competent. But the last doctor that I found in Denver, he was Burmese, was an amazing man. When I came to see him, and I had tumors all over my belly, like I told you, he examined me and he says, I will never give up on you.
That's a wonderful thing to hear.
Can you imagine having a doctor like that? It was like a miracle.
So I keep trying to cut to the chase, but there is no chase. It's a long story. So this guy treated you with this quasi-conventional therapy for another 3 to 6 months, and then you stopped, and you've been fine since.
So I think I had bendamustine for like 3 months period, only 4 of them, and then he thought it was too dangerous to continue, and I lost some hair. Bendamustine doesn't make you completely bald. And the drawback from bendamustine was that my blood results were refusing to normalize. And after 3 or 4 months, I was really worried that I was getting one of those, I forget what the term is. It's a syndrome where your bloods just don't normalize, and eventually you catch you develop leukemia and die. That's what happens after chemo sometimes. There's I'm not up on the terms anymore. There's a name for it. So the people in Canada that were my COLI support team said, well, why don't you start COLIs again and see if that'll normalize you, and that'll get, because I had full remission out of bendamustine. For the first time ever after Bexar, I had full remission. Whatever.
So that means all the nodules went away. They were no longer visible.
Exactly. There was only minor involvement after the COLIs. So the bendamustine was able to mop up whatever there was, and I had full remission at that point.
So how long did you go back on the COLIs for?
Marrow transplant in Bethesda, and I declined it.
Yeah, that we won't editorialize about that. But the mortality rate with the bone marrow, where they wipe out your bone marrow and retransplant you, that's what they do essentially. You're in the hospital for months. The mortality or the death rate is from 10% to what? Just from the procedure.
Well, at that time, they had tried to get a match for me, and they were still struggling with that. I didn't have any suitable relatives. And so, given my history, I figured that the odds were about 50-50 that they were going to kill me.
Well,
So
anyway, those are bad odds.
that
So,
was bad
okay,
odds. So I
trying to
say,
summarize.
one rule I always had from the beginning after I was diagnosed was that I was not going to let the doctors kill me. I would rather that the cancer kill me.
Good, wonderful philosophy. So you went through this last chemo, then you did the Coleys for how long? Another 6 months?
So I did the Coleys after I realized that I was not getting better, not normalizing. I did it for 5 or 6 months after that, and really just hitting it as hard as I could every few days. And by the end of August that year, I had blood work done, and it had all normalized all of a sudden.
What year was that? What
It
year was that?
was that was 2011.
So you've been fine for over a decade now.
Yes, that was the last that I got the remission in the fall of 2010, and then I did the Coleys, and then I've never done anything else since then.
How much money did the Coleys cost total?
Zero.
No, come on. The doctors charged you, didn't they?
The Canadian laboratory made it free for patients. It costs money to go to that hospital in Tijuana, but it didn't cost anything for the toxins.
Well, you said they weren't available now, but I was doing some digging online, and I think they are available, and the listeners can find it if they want to try this sort of thing. What other cancers have worked well for collies besides lymphomas?
Uh, I heard that the hospital was getting really good results for metastatic breast cancer. They tried it for pancreatic, but there wasn't enough time. People usually wait too long, and you need 3 months for Coleys to work. And if you don't have those 3 months, it's not worth it.
Well, there are a number of interesting lessons we can draw from your story. But first, before we do that, what other important points do you want to bring out?
You gotta be stubborn and courageous to do this treatment. It's very hard. It's one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it works.
Well, that I was sort of going to say something like that. I was going to say that you have to learn everything you can because no one is going to advocate for you because so many people have conflicts of interest. And that's the kind way of putting it, putting that they've been bribed by the industry to give these expensive drugs and rip the insurance and our whole society off for these hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, these treatments cost $100,000 a year for cancer treatments on average, maybe more now. There are some treatments that are $500,000 a year, and the financial incentives are so high that they've essentially bought the whole system. They bought the hospitals, they bought the doctors, and the patients' families are even sometimes paid off. I mean, and it's crazy. So the second thing that I want to emphasize, go ahead.
Dr. Coley grew it on a piece of meat, like I said. And the man who had the lab in Canada producing these toxins, he said it's very inexpensive to produce it. He had a state-of-the-art lab and microfilters and all that, but it's the same process.
These are sterile, right? They're not. They're sterilized. They're not. There's no bacteria in Coley's toxins. They just are the bacterial and the beef exudate from the cows.
Exactly. It's the exudate.
Interesting. So, of course, the the thing that's obvious to everyone who's listening is that you're an unusual person, an unusually positive attitude. Did you have this kind of a positive attitude your whole life?
No, I tend to depression at times, so I can't say that. But uh, when they tell you you're dying, you're very motivated to do something about it.
You, you get through an experience like this and nothing seems difficult, I'm sure.
I couldn't hear you.
You get through an experience like this and nothing ever seems difficult again, I'm sure.
Well, it's like everything else is icing on the cake. I should have been dead 20 years ago.
It's a wonderful story, Vera, and I'm going to continue to try um, to present some alternatives to standard therapy, the holistic thing, the alternative doctors, and it's just a disgrace that this stuff doesn't populate our therapeutic armamentarium right now. It's crazy. And I mean, I think it's better than the standard therapies, although certainly the last point is that you used a combination of standard therapy and the alternative therapy, and maybe that is what got you here. I mean, who knows? No way to tell for sure. It's one story.
I've done everything. I never excluded standard therapy. I never excluded clinical trials. I combined everything that I had available to me.
Vera, I'm grateful for your time, and I'm sure my listeners are going to love this one. So let me sign off and we can chat for a moment.
Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Yo.
Okay.